Hi, I'm Patricia Greenberg, and today we are recording from beautiful Montauk, Long Island, out here enjoying the summer. And let's all have a nice, quiet, fun summer because we're in for a tumultuous fall, especially what we're going to be talking about today. Today, my guest is Don Iannone, and he's the author of America's Dream at a Crossroads, the 2024 presidential election and beyond. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Don, I read your book and I immediately wanted you to come on the show to have the conversation about how polarized our country is today and really what we need to do about it. There's so much to cover, especially in light of President Biden stepping down and graciously handing over the nomination to Kamala Harris. Now, obviously, this is going to dramatically change the way the Democratic Party is viewed, and I'm sure it sent the Republican advisors back to the drawing board to see about how to approach this now. I mean, it's a whole different dynamic overnight. Everything's changed. So first we'll start out with how do we bring back civility and conversation, whether it's one-on-one, group chats, national media, what do we do?
Well, I think the first step is to move from a debate mode to a conversation mode. And I think doing more listening is vital to that because we don't understand when we're too busy just trying to get our point across.
You know, your
Yeah.
call to action is to implement major changes in the political campaign finance, the special interest lobbying, federal spending, and, of course, many other changes in government. Where do we start?
Well, in a lot of ways, trying to change government, especially the federal government, which is a $27 trillion enterprise that has a $36 trillion debt hanging over its head. It's like trying to change the course of the ocean.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a negative sense. That's realistically how things work. Just imagine the waves as they come in and go out, because that's the everyday life in Washington, if we want to limit the discussion of the federal government. But I think that the whole issue is to understand whoever becomes the next president, that they understand that change requires people to come to their work with a different mindset and to see themselves not as political appointees, but to see themselves as public servants. And so that shift goes hand in hand with, the answer to your first question was civility. How do we achieve that? But I think that, it's a process. And it's okay, I'd like to tell a story because I dedicated my book to George Voinovich, who I worked closely with when he was the mayor of City Cleveland and then when he was governor. And I learned a lot from him. And I participated in a process that he followed that was called an Operations Improvement Task Force approach, because the understanding was the main thing that we have to do is gain control over how government operates. It's a sexy idea to talk about policy, right? Everybody loves to be policy wonks.
Right.
But policy takes so long to formulate and to get into place. What George Voinovich and his team, and being a part of his team, taught me is that you have to get control over operations. And I could elaborate on that if you want to, but the basic point is just that. And bringing in outside eyes. So what did Voinovich do? He recruited several hundred business, government, education, nonprofit leaders to come in and be a part of a team that lived inside the city of Cleveland government and state government for 90 days. And the question is, what can we get done in terms of getting a handle on the operations of government in 90 days? And then, of course, how we look at short, medium, and long-term action plans.
And then this brings us to compromise. You had said beautifully that in America, compromise is the last thing we're willing to do to keep our democracy and the American dream alive.
Yes, absolutely. And the other part of it is that, politics has become a blood sport. Mm-hmm. And, I listened with absolute disdain at the comments that were made about Vice President Harris by Senator Vance. And I have to tell you, that doesn't help the Republican cause at all.
Right.
First of all, it's just unimaginable that anybody would say that.
Yeah.
But that's what turns it into a blood sport. And the fact that there was an attempted assassination on former President Trump's life in Pennsylvania, it's another indication. Well, it indicates to me that we're seeing this systemic collapse of our political and governmental system, and that we resort to these things as a way of trying to get in government what we want, and it's not right.
Don, in your experience of sort of analyzing this and working with politicians, are some of these, are these publicity stunts, faked assassinations, saying horrible things about, the other candidate to rile people up? Do people really mean this? I'm trying to understand if that's just a way to get more people to watch the show and more people to get them to vote. What is the motivation behind this behavior?
Well, I think you raise a very good point. And I think at times, these things definitely do represent publicity stunts.
Mm-hmm.
And at other times, I think this is just how unhinged we really are. But let's say that they're planned publicity stunts. Are these things appropriate?
Right.
Not at all, So even if they're just a part of the watch my show kind of strategy, it's totally inappropriate.
Do you think younger people understand that? We do, us oldsters. We remember what it was like when, someone got elected president and you just accepted it and you roll with it and you went along with it. And those in office, maybe initially they're seething inside because their candidate didn't make it, but you figure out how to make it work. We remember those days.
Right.
Do young people, because I know that we're going to get to that later, but I know that one of your passions is really helping young people embrace the world and what to do.
Yes.
So what are they seeing? These unformed brains, these 18 and 19-year-olds who now they're allowed to vote and they have sway and they have a say in what's going to happen, but what are they absorbing?
Well, I think that you make an excellent point. And in some ways, the inexperienced eye creates a freshness. And I think young people bring that. But I think for a lot of young people, they've kind of, they really haven't gotten attached to the whole political thing, that, they'd rather just kind of do their thing and, know that everything is going to be okay. But in my research for the book, I interviewed several young people, and I think of a couple in Columbus, Ohio, Bruce, and I'm just going to use first names, okay. Bruce and Ellen. Bruce and Ellen both graduated from Ohio State. They had a combined debt of about $120,000, which isn't bad compared to a lot of the premier schools. Not that Ohio State's not an excellent institution, but you look at some of the other schools and what you have to pay. But it was apparent that they couldn't conceive of buying a house for at least 5 years. Yeah. And the other part of it is that, they really didn't want to move in with their parents or one set of parents. And to be on their own, they had to live in an apartment and basically had to stay near the campus. And that's the best that they could do. But, there's a lot of bitterness in these young voices. It's not just, we were being ignored, but it's just, why did we inherit the world that we did?
Mm-hmm. And my fear is that older people are just going to throw their hands up and say, at this stage of the game, I don't even care who becomes president. I'm not going to be here that much longer. And then the young kids saying, well, we have no voice, no matter what we say, no matter what we like, everybody feels like they're on the losing end of this, unfortunately, right? I mean, so Don, how do we target the areas of government that need the immediate overhaul?
Well, I would suggest the same approach that was used in the city of Cleveland and the state of Ohio when George Voinovich took leadership. It's an operations improvement task force. So there's a lot of strategies that can be used in trying to fix government, if you want to use that term. part of what everybody has to understand is why things are the way they are. That isn't an acceptance to keep things that way. But if you don't understand that, you can, in the process of changing things in government, you can create, so many other problems, because government has a responsibility to do certain things. And when it makes a commitment, it's not like a business that can say, well, I'm going to renegotiate this with you, because government is not a business, and there's a real danger to running to such. But I think, what I would recommend is that we really get a handle on what goes on all the federal agencies, and that we're not afraid to do honest audits of what's going on. We have the talent to do this. And so that's important. But, the easiest thing that people, well, I should say the thing that people want to jump to, and we talked about it a few minutes ago, is we're going to basically come in with an entirely different set of policies. We're going to undo legislation that's been put in place. And this is a discussion of really how what any president can do is influenced by his predecessors. It's like economic policies, interest rates, and everything have been put in place. I should say policies on what you're going to do with interest rates have been put in place. And so you inherit that. But the economy, for example, has a life of its own. And government does too. And government should not be able to operate in an unaccountable way, because that creates problems. But get control over operations. Look at where we can basically, and I'm a fan of basically reducing the federal debt and making sure that the federal government balances its budget, as states and cities must do by law. So that means you're going to make cuts.
Right.
How do you do that? Does everybody take a 2.5% cut in their budget, including the military and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, EPA? Do you set other priorities that say, well, our national security situation is in need of so much that we can't cut there? But let's make a conscious decision about doing those things.
So you state that government, and I'm quoting, government should not be about deal making. The
Right.
problem is we're almost at the point of no return. You're going to have to make deals with people and agencies and heads of agencies to make this work. So I guess there's that fine line between that. Working with people who are already caught in this mentality. Don, you state in your book, the American dream should be a defining issue for the presidential election. Let's get into that now. What is the American dream, and why is it lost?
So the American dream, in the most simple and clear sense, is really about economic and social mobility. And that's what it's been about from early colonial days, when, the earliest Americans arrived here in search of religious freedom. They first of all used land. Land was really the way that they kind of built wealth. And then from that, they built, businesses and industries to support their lifestyle. But the American dream has been with us a long time. Growing up in the 50s and 60s, the American dream was very much about having a house, whether it was in the city or in the suburb, car in the garage, white picket fence, kids, family, one person in the family. Usually the father was the person who worked, and mom stayed at home. That was the model that we saw. But it's changed, and sadly, what we have today is that 1% of America's richest people have control over 33% of all the net wealth in this country. And it is also true that they pay 46% of the individual taxes. But just look at that, 1/3 of the wealth. And you could break that down further to understand where most people come out. But a lot of people are basically severely impaired from participating fully in the economy. We have a good economy right now. It grew in the last quarter of 2.8%. But Americans remain pessimistic about it. And I think in part that is associated with the feelings around President Biden, which is why I think it was really a great thing
Mhm.
for him to turn the reins over to Vice President Harris. And interestingly, I had some interactions with some people that are part of her new campaign
Oh,
just
really?
today.
Oh, how
Yeah.
wonderful. Mhm.
And I think they're I mean, they realize what the challenge is. But I think they also know that despite the fact that the poll came out yesterday and said that, Vice President Harris is 1 point, has 1 point less in the voting than Trump. But the truth is that it's going to be close. It's going to be back and forth. The real election begins late September and October, and that's when things get really figured out in terms of who's going to win. But I think there's a sense of freshness around Vice President Harris being, the candidate. Some say, well, why didn't the Democrats do this earlier? And I think that too is strategy. I think in part they were trying to, create some confusion, and find out what was going to happen with JD Vance becoming, former President Trump's running mate. So there's, but I think there's also the personal side of it that President Biden, he's just had an amazing career in public service. And I'm sure it was an incredibly difficult thing for him to say, I'm not going to run.
Oh, it had to be. And I think that there's so much that goes into that. Embarrassment, admission of defeat, the feeling too old, right? This is
Yes.
something, Don, we talk
Yes.
about on my show all the time because, we
Yeah.
really focus on aging. And so much of, why I loved your book and so much why I wanted you to come on and talk about this is there, instead of this saying he's too old to function, get him out of here. It's more of a, he had a beautiful ride. He
Mhm.
set out for the most part to accomplish what he wanted. He became president of the United States, which is beyond most people's dreams. A lot of
Absolutely.
them dream to become president of the United States, and how few have ever gotten there. So he's to be congratulated. And I want to also say, regardless, I think Donald
Mhm.
Trump needs to be congratulated for
Mhm.
how far he's come and what he's achieved. And
Right.
so whatever means that either one used to get there, we're talking about some very substantial, serious, accomplished people.
Yes. Yes. And I recognize
And
that in my book.
I want everybody to recognize that both sides to
Mhm.
say, love them or hate them, they're accomplished and they
Mhm.
have a bank of knowledge and a bank of experience that they're coming from. And instead of, I think you and I are on the same page with this, instead of saying how much you hate either one of them,
Yeah.
which is going to lead into what I really wanted to get to the heart of it with you is, what do we look for in a candidate now? What do we do now that we have? I almost feel like we don't know who the vice presidential candidate is going to be on the Democratic side, but we need to start looking at what is Vice President Kamala Harris believe in, what does
Mhm.
former President Donald Trump believe in,
Mhm.
and I'm learning about this as I go. Do you vote
Mhm.
on the issues? Do you vote on that you don't like the person? What do we look for now? I guess let's try to come up with some plan, which you already have pretty much, but
Right.
let's talk about that. How could, Don, I think this is going to help people relax and not be so volatile. Well, Donald Trump did this, or President Biden failed to get this
Yeah.
accomplished. You know what? We're here today in 2024. What is it we need to do going forward? I really hope to accomplish with this show that we can be very solution oriented going forward.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that we really do have a fair election
Mhm.
and that we minimize the domestic and international influences to the extent they do. And I think also making sure that we educate people very quickly, and the media has a great responsibility for that. Is there going to be another debate? I hope there is. I honestly hope that there is, and I think that would be an important time for everybody to kind of figure out what they think, assuming they talk about the issues. You can tell from my book that I care a great deal about the issues. The main character in my book is the American dream. It's not the Republican or Democratic candidate. I make the same advice available to both sides. I did with earlier senior member of the Republican member of the House of Representatives, his team reached out, and so they have the book, and I haven't heard back in terms of what they're going to do, but I was excited that at least somebody says I want to hear that. And then this morning I had an inquiry. It was a small inquiry from the Democratic side that said, we're actually interested in what you thought. What do you say here that you think we need to listen to or hear? I said, wow, okay.
That's amazing. That's the congratulations. That's huge. That's
well, there's small steps, and sometimes. So I had somebody ask me the question, what happens if somebody steals your ideas?
Yeah.
Steal away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
like
and this is to
answer.
copy it is the greatest form of flattery. So, I would welcome anybody who comes in and says, let's reduce this budget. Let's get a handle on campaign finance. Let's reduce the influence of special interest lobbies. Let's actually think about the domestic agenda and all the issues that are rolled into it in an integrated way. Let's think about our international and global agenda in an integrated way. That's what's key.
Yeah.
Because we're basically making transactions around, environmental regulations, and people are still in a stage of belief or disbelief around, climate change. And so, we stall out on that. And meanwhile, we're not seeing the big picture. And that's what my book tries to do. Remind us that we have a big picture in which all of this stuff exists.
I want to talk about the book extensively, but I have one more thing I want you to cover and maybe help clear up the confusion with the public. So kind of the basic is that the belief is that the Republicans would like less government intervention in our lives. So less regulations, which kind of translates into less regulation in business, less regulation in our personal lives. And the belief is that, rightly or wrongly, that the Democrats try too hard to intervene on everything and have policies and everything in place for everything you do. But we're seeing that's not really true on either side. So one thing that I wanted to ask you about that, which I find very interesting, is that, the government is swelled with people. It's enormous. It's bureaucratic. It takes, we all know, from the motor vehicle to calling any government agency, how long you have to get through 11 people before you even get to someone that remotely knows what you needs to help you. So when a new president comes in and needs to appoint all these members, there's a lot of empty spaces. There's a lot of unfilled jobs. There's a lot of gaps in government of how they're going to fill it, who's going to fill it, and who's being paid. Isn't that one thing that we could tackle right away, is making these departments smaller with less people working?
Well, I think you've raised, I should say you've opened the door to the whole thing about the role of technology. Artificial intelligence is going to play a huge role. Already so many of the federal agencies, including the IRS and others, are really making extensive use of, artificial intelligence in different ways. And I think that that's an important, we have to be very aware of cybersecurity concerns, but that's going to have a huge impact. And this is why a lot of the government unions are so worried about jobs being eliminated by technology, and they will be.
Right.
But
and then where are those jobs going to open up for people? Do you think that's going to balance itself out because the population is aging and there are actually less people entering the workforce?
I think it's just a shift. You look at, my gosh, you look at some of the large, what we call our safety net programs, whether it's Social Security, and we all paid into that, right? And we all paid for Medicare, but, Medicaid has grown so large that, we can hardly handle it. And so it's just, so I think we need to ask less of government. We need to learn to deal with less. We need to expect whatever government does for us is going to be the right thing. They're going to do it in the right way. But when I say you have to reduce the federal debt, that means there's money we're spending now that's not going to be spent unless you're going to raise revenues through increased taxation. I don't see that happening, at least on the Republican side. What the Trump administration has planned all along is that all the what they call the 2017, tax incentives for the rich would be renewed instantly. That's if he were reelected. I mean, I'm convinced that's what would happen. You were asking about, can't we get by with smaller government?
With smaller government, yes.
And I think the answer is not can we, but we're going to have to.
Have to. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much duplication. I know this because I worked for the Department of Interior, I worked for Labor, I worked for Commerce, I worked for EPA. I can tell you that there's so much duplication of effort across all these agencies. And we don't want anybody to lose their job over this, but at the same time, we've got to get control over government. So what's the alternative? If there are things that government shouldn't do but still need to be done, how do we handle that? That's the whole issue of public-private partnerships, businesses and government working together. That's what Indianapolis did. That's what Louisville, Kentucky did. That's what Minneapolis did. So it's possible. But I think, some of these things can be contracted out. That's not complete privatization where you have a wastewater treatment plant that suddenly becomes owned by a private company. I don't think we want that. But private contract management can save a lot of money. It'll be a lot more efficient. So the principles that we all know from every aspect of organizational life, whether it's healthcare, whether it's business, it has to do with continuous improvement. And I think that unfortunately, we've kind of given up on continuous improvement in government because of the politics and because people don't want to suggest improvements. They're going to cause them to lose their funding, their jobs. And so there's all this pressure put on us. So we can't bring the size of government down. But we are at a crashing point. It's a day of reckoning. That was Hallstrom's observation years ago. And I think that's what we need to pay attention to is things cannot continue the way they are.
Right. Don, there's so much here. And of course, how did you, I'm sure it just came out of you, but how'd you come to write this book, America's Dreams at a Crossroads, the 2024 presidential election and beyond?
You're going to enjoy this story. I started out writing a book that was really focused in American literature, and I had tracked the American dream through American literature, whether it was Steinbeck, Hemingway, you name it. I mean, it was, F. Scott Fitzgerald, go through all these great American authors, and started writing a book that was really focused on tracking it, but actually doing it in a very unique way where, I was trying to put these things in the context of where America was and asking questions that we weren't asking before about the American dream. So that's what I was trying to do. And Paul Hernacki, who's the author of Rust Belt Boy, who grew up in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, and he was grateful. He was so gracious. Twice he gave me his time, and he said, he just went, "Don, what are you doing? You're going to write a book about the American dream and American literature now? Write that later. Don't you realize we have an election coming up?" And I went, wow. And so the book turned from what it would have been to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so thank you, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing about great writers. Great writers, you need to, just as Annie Dillard said, you learn to be a great writer by reading good writing. Right. But talk to writers like Paul Hernacki or my friend Don Holbrook out in Las Vegas, who has so many bestsellers. It's just unbelievable. But that's the key. And he was able to pivot me in my thinking. And that was really important to this book coming out the way it did.
Don Iannone, my guest, is telling us about, his professional background and his interest and how it led to this wonderful book on talking about how really to save the American dream. What can we do going forward to save it? Don, how do you feel about the future of America?
I was born optimistic, even though I didn't grow up poor, but we had a lot less than a lot of other families of kids that I played with in my school neighborhood. So I feel that I've always been optimistic, and I've erred to the side of a positive way of looking at things. And it's been built in me that I need to be a source of inspiration for people. that's what college teaching does for me, but that's what my consulting work did for years. But I do think that we have a lot of serious challenges to face. But I think if we face those with courage and with intelligence, we stand a better chance of doing the right thing. But I think you said something earlier, and I want to bring that back out, which is really important. A lot of people say, let the next president, whoever it is, get elected, and I'll just go on with my life. Imagine what would happen if we took serious Project 2025, which said that we're going to basically install evangelistic Christian religion into everything, and that we basically are going to come in with a whole new crew of conservative thinking public service types and just wipe out the workforce that we have. But think about just the implications of forcing a set of values on how government operates and everything else. Meanwhile, disregarding the fundamental things that the nation's really about. We live in a republic. We have a democracy. We have freedom. And a lot of people would argue we don't have the freedoms that we used to have. I think a lot of women would argue that right now. Sad as it may be. But you know something? We need to be positive. We cannot afford to just say government is the enemy. We need to get in, dig in, and do what we can. And my message to your listeners and your viewers is really, don't give up, get involved, vote, and vote in as informed way as you can, because that is so critical. It is so critical.
And so what do you hope to accomplish with your book? What's the tool that we can use it for going forward?
So already we've started an initiative to, there are probably 50,000 economic development organizations, and I worked with a number of them in my years as a consultant and as a teacher. But I think economic development plays a critical role in helping people achieve the American dream. They do that through job creation, business retention and expansion, workforce development, entrepreneurship, technological innovation. So that's where I've initially decided to dive in. And I've got a group that's working with me in what I'd call a semi-advisory committee way. But people are taking hold of this. And that's how I was introduced to this senior Republican member of the House. And so we're going to do a webinar at the international conference about the book and how it relates to economic development. So I think we need to dip into that, but we need to do the same thing in medicine. That medicine as a path and healthcare as a path to the American dream. Education, same thing. And that's what I hope to build fires. I'm one guy who at 73 is probably working harder than I ever thought I would, but I love it. It's all passion. It's just, stuff I love.
Well, we're all the little engine that could, I keep saying, right? That, we have this little spark of an idea. And a friend of mine just said the other day, ideas rule the world. One little idea, what can I do to make a change? And I always say, Don, if you've changed one person, that's fantastic. But if you change a handful of people, did great. That really, you made an impact. And so, we have to keep remembering that, and that we can advance the American dream, like you say, all the way from the election forward. How can people get in contact with you where they can find the book?
So they can reach me through my my writing website, which is donaldiannone.com. That's Donaldiannone.com. And the book is available, and it is selling, by the way, on Amazon.
Wonderful.
And it's on other booksellers, but I think Amazon is probably the easiest way to get it. And just America's Dream at a Crossroad, and looks like this.
And we'll post all of that on the website when we air the show.
Okay.
So I'll be there as well. Don Iannone, thank you so much for joining me today. There's so much more to talk about. I'll have you come back at a future date as we get closer to the election, because I want to continue to keep talking.
I would love that.
because I
Yeah.
do think we can maybe not sway the vote, but we can at least get people to get out and vote. That's really the critical part. Great conversation of great importance that, really needs to keep going. And in closing, of course, I want to ask you, what do you like about getting older?
Wow. Well, I certainly like the wisdom part of it.
Huh?
And I think my wife, Mary, and I would say that since we stopped doing some things work wise, I still haven't stopped a lot of stuff, that we have more time to do the things that we really love.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's what it's all about, is being happy and finding joy. So again, Don Iannone, I want to thank you so much again for being here and talking about your new book, America's Dream at a Crossroads. And of course, all the things that we could be doing as American citizens to make not only our country a better place, but the world a better place. So thank you again. And I want to thank all of you who are listening. I'm Patricia Greenberg. And for more shows on aging well, please subscribe to this channel. And for more information, feedback, and topic ideas, you can contact me at patriciagreenberg.com. Stay well and stay safe. Thank you again, Don.
Thank you.